a bizarre and twisted case of a fatal attraction. It's about an obsessive woman that would stop at nothing to get what she wanted.
And it was just another one of her schemes to bring Dave back into her life and make herself look like a victim.
How did I not see anything, and how could I be so naive or so stupid or so gullible?
It changed this from a missing persons investigation, and now it's a homicide investigation. Is there anyone that you think would want to hurt Cari?
How could this person do this to my daughter? For what reason?
The key to the case is figuring out if Cari is not alive, who has been actually sending these messages to Dave and to Liz.
This isn't good, so now this person is armed. They've already proven to be dangerous.
It was like the killer wanted to keep a keepsake of what she had done. It was just chilling.
Holy Christ, this is despicable.
With no body, no murder weapon, no witnesses.
I mean, what?
By the spring of 2015, 37-year-old single mom Cari Farver has been missing for over 2 years. Nobody has seen her and nobody has heard her voice.
The only sign of her was through texts and email.
These include hundreds of violent and threatening text messages sent to her ex, Dave Krupa, and his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Liz Gollier, also known as Shanna.
A lot of people thought she'd just gone off her meds and she was, you know, just went off the deep end and left. But I knew that that's not what happened.
Cari's mother, Nancy, is convinced that something terrible has happened to her daughter. Nancy was really frustrated. She felt the police weren't taking her concerns seriously. While maternal instinct is the most powerful of intuitions, it's not unusual for a mother's concerns to be ignored. Cari's mother was not the first woman in the throes of panic to be ignored by people in a position to help.
I knew what my daughter was like, and she wouldn't stay away this long. Something has happened.
It was as if nobody believed Nancy that something terrible had happened to Cari until Detectives Jim Doty and Ryan Avis appeared on the case.
By the time Avis and Doty took over, the case had become cold.
What we did first was just go back to the case file. We started looking through everything that the previous investigator had. To me, the thing that was glaring was Liz. This lady had no involvement in Cari's life until all of a sudden she went missing.
According to Liz, she only met Cari once in this brief encounter outside of Dave's apartment.
All of a sudden she's this focus of harassment. Her name was all over all the reports. So to me, there was something with Liz. She definitely was a person of interest.
Key to the case at this point is figuring out if Cari is not alive, who has been actually sending these messages to Dave and to Liz.
Myself and Ryan were not digital experts at all, so we had to call one of our coworkers, Tony Cava, who's our digital forensic expert, and had him come in and start working the case hand in hand with us.
Cari, or the person, the imposter who was pretending to be Cari, sent Dave about 15,000 email messages over a 3-year span. We knew these messages don't seem to really be coming from Cari Farver, and that was the initial mystery.
So I thought, there's got to be a way we can track down this digital activity.
When Liz was getting all of these messages through the course of investigation, she actually gave her phone to police and allowed them to dump all her files and review them.
Jim and I had the advantage of being the second pair of eyes to look at it and go back over to other details that were maybe overseen.
One of the things they found when they downloaded Liz's phone was a photograph of Cari Farver's Ford Explorer.
We looked at the metadata of that photo, and it was taken about a month before police even recovered her vehicle. So somehow Liz knew where Cari's vehicle was before law enforcement even did. Another thing we found on the phone download, there were 6 calls that were made to Cari's residence. It was using the *67 prefix to disguise the number, and so Liz was calling Cari 6 times. This didn't make sense to us because she said she'd only met Cari one time passing through a hallway. We found an email that Cari had sent to Dave Krupa. It consisted of a picture of a woman who was tied up. We found that picture of that bound woman in Liz's phone, and the metadata showed it was taken from Liz's phone.
They realized that Liz had put duct tape on her own mouth, had tied up her own hands, and crawled into the trunk of a car.
I wanted to go talk to Nancy and tell her that I believed her. I believed her daughter didn't just vanish, that her daughter didn't just leave her and her son alone, that I believe somebody was responsible for what happened to Cari. But I couldn't tell her everything we knew at that time because it was still an active case.
When he called, he said, "Can I come out and talk to you?" And I was just a little bit short with him because I thought, you haven't done anything so far. What are you gonna do now? I said, okay. So he came out and he said, I just want you to know, he said, I don't think she left on her own free will. And that was the first time anybody in his authority position had told me that.
She was happy to know that we had reopened the case and that we had made some progress.
I honestly felt like maybe something was gonna happen now.
And this visit leads to Dodie and Avis looking at yet another clue.
It's a clue that had come up earlier, but now with Liz Gollier in their sights as a suspect, their fresh eyes make all the difference.
So when we went to interview Nancy, she informed us that she had received a picture of a check via text message.
Right after Cari disappeared, Nancy got a text from her, and it said that she had sold all of her furniture and she wanted Nancy to let the buyer into the house, to let them pick it up.
I'm to help this person go into her house and get her furniture out of there, and here's the check. She texts me a picture of a check from a person that was made out to Cari.
And it was signed Shanna Gollier, which we knew Liz Gollier, real name was Shanna.
And this signature is yet another link between these two women, Cari and Liz, who were supposed to be strangers.
Granted, we didn't give us any answers on what had happened to Cari, but we knew Liz knew more than she was telling us.
All signs were pointing back to Liz.
And then Liz herself goes to police with a new suspect.
I look down the hallway and I see another investigator walking Liz down our hallway.
And she says she's come to this stunning realization. It might not have been Cari Farver harassing her all along. Police have been taking a close look at Liz Gollier.
All of the investigating they had done was leading them to the idea that Cari Farver was dead and Liz had been impersonating her this entire time.
Looking at Liz's phone download, we had the picture of Cari's vehicle. We had the *67 phone calls that Liz had placed to Cari's home phone number.
And there's one more piece of evidence, that mystery fingerprint left in Cari's car. But so far, police can't find a match in their database.
One of the things we did when we took the case is we had that fingerprint compared to Liz's fingerprints, and it was a match.
Dodie delivered startling news to Dave Krupa. He told him that they suspected that Liz Gollier was pretending to be Cari.
Police had come to me and said, Liz is the culprit. But I still hadn't seen any evidence myself. So I was either trying to ignore the whole thing or trying to understand how this person I spent so much time with could be this other person I didn't know.
He never questioned his stalker's identity. She said she was Cari, so who else could it be?
Dave would receive messages from Cari while he and Liz were together, so Dave thought, how could Liz be the stalker?
Meanwhile, police can't prove that Liz murdered Cari, and there still isn't enough for an arrest. At this point, police get a lucky break. In December of 2015, Liz Gollier walked into the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office.
I look down the hallway and I see another investigator walking Liz down our hallway and into his office. So I eavesdrop a little bit. I hear Liz telling the other investigator something about a harassment report.
Liz leaves and Detective Avis sees an opening.
Liz Gollier coming to us and wanting to talk about something was a huge moment and an opportunity that we could not miss. Within 30 minutes of Liz leaving our office, I hop in my truck and I drove to her house in Council Bluffs and just knocked on the door. She opened the door and I told her I was an investigator with the sheriff's office and I had heard she had stopped in.
Hi, was it Shannon?
Yeah, or Liz.
And I told her that I didn't have a heavy caseload at the time and I'd be more than happy to help her with whatever report that she had tried to file. She let me come in, we sat down and talked.
My sergeant you had just talked to, and he said that you were trying to file harassment.
Yeah, a harassment. The reports have been made against Cari Farver.
Cari Farver?
Yes, F-A-R-V-E-R.
I knew who Cari was, obviously, and I just played dumb. I wanted her to think that I had no clue of what she was talking about, just to lower her guard.
She used to date my boyfriend, only for about 2 weeks.
Liz tells Avis she's come to this stunning realization. It might not have been Cari Farver harassing her all along.
I'm not really sure if it really is Cari Farver.
She believed that it hadn't been Cari who was stalking Dave all this time after all. In fact, she believed it was Amy Flora, Dave's ex.
Amy Flora is Dave Krupa's ex-girlfriend and also the mother of his children. All these years, Liz thought she had been harassed by Cari, but now she thought maybe it was actually Amy this whole time pretending to be Cari, and that would make more sense, right?
They only dated for 2 weeks, and I don't understand why a person would still be stalking him almost 3 years later. It's getting ridiculous. She keeps stalking me on Facebook.
So Amy still would like to be with Dave?
I'm guessing. I don't know.
Okay.
I have no clue. I just want her to leave me alone.
I then request, hey, could I do a download of your phone to extract those messages?
We have a machine that'll plug in your phone. Sign right there. You're giving me consent to retrieve information.
In that moment, I was so giddy, I can't believe I'm going to download her phone and she's just gonna hand it over to me.
When Liz's phone was downloaded in 2013, Liz was a victim, reporting a stalker. So only the current information was downloaded. Now, however, she was a suspect, and she was unaware that detectives have the ability to download everything on the phone, even things she thought she had deleted.
I ran it straight to Tony Cava.
Tony Cava, who is the forensic digital expert, is going to actually start examining her phone. But in the meantime, there is an even more pressing concern. Dave Krupa's gun is missing.
I purchased a pistol for self-protection in case Cari would come in the house with ill intent towards me or my children.
Dave came home one evening and noticed something was amiss.
The box that I kept the weapon in, it's been moved. So my stomach drops. I'm just, oh no. I open the box, the weapon is missing. So I immediately call the police and tell them I have a firearm stolen.
Liz had mentioned the missing gun to Detective Avis. She implied that Amy Flora was the thief.
Do you know what kind of gun it was?
A 9mm.
9mm?
I know it was a Smith & Wesson, only because I've seen the box.
This isn't good. So now this person is armed. They've already proven to be dangerous, so it was a heart-stopping moment.
The missing gun was in the hands of someone who was about to pull the trigger.
1-9, rest of your emergency.
On December 5th, 2015, 6 days after Dave's gun was stolen, a call was placed to police from Big Lake Park in Council Bluffs, Iowa.
It was Liz Gollier. She had been shot and she was bleeding alone on the walking trail in the dark.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
Oh, yeah. I've been shot in the leg. Oh, God. Oh, Jesus.
Liz Gollier came here to clear her head and walked out about halfway on this bridge and was approached by a female, she said, and the female came up behind her and said, "How do you like Dave?" And then told her to lay on the ground and shot her in the leg.
Do you know what she looked like at all?
No, she's behind me.
Liz was shot in the thigh. I didn't do any permanent damage. There was a lot of blood, and she was rushed to the hospital by ambulance.
At the beginning, Liz said she didn't know who shot her, but she kind of changed that story and eventually said Amy Flora shot her.
Amy Flora, Dave's ex and the mother of his 2 kids. To police, this story makes very little sense.
When I learned that Liz Gollier had been shot out here, I found it highly suspicious that the day before, she felt the need to tell me that Dave Krupa's gun had been stolen too. And less than 24 hours later, she is shot. I mean, it's just odd, to say the least. I never believed that Amy Flora shot Liz Gollier ever.
She had an alibi, and the evidence just didn't point to there being anyone else in the park that night.
It was pretty quickly determined that most likely Liz Gollier had shot herself. Amy Flora was cleared nearly immediately that evening.
Another one of her schemes to bring Dave back into her life and make herself look like a victim.
When the shooting happened, this is finally when Dave gets it.
At this point, Dave can no longer deny the truth. It's Liz, not Cari, who's been tormenting and stalking him for all these years.
It was undeniable at that point. I knew it was her, and I knew it had to be my gun. It was like running into a brick wall in a race car. It'd be like if gravity just failed. The first thing my mind did was start to go back to all the things that had happened over all these years, and how did I not see anything, and how could I be so naive or so stupid or so gullible? Everything you thought you knew was a lie.
For Dave, the frustration at this point is overwhelming.
And if they don't arrest her soon, I'm gonna kill her.
Deputy Tony Cava is actually on a mission to prove Liz is the culprit.
He has the recent download of Liz Gollier's phone and all of the messages that are supposedly been sent from Cari Farver.
He's spending hours of his own free time, more than 3,000 hours, trying to decipher where those messages actually came from.
Liz signed up for upwards of 20 or 30 fake addresses that say they're Cari Farver, and they're different variations on Cari's name or even her real email address. Some of the very first ones came from carifarver@gmail.com. I mean, they would, if you didn't look very closely and you received this message, you would think it was from the real Cari Farver.
His patience and his persistence pay off, and eventually he is able to trace the messages right back to Liz Gollier.
Every account that we look at, every impersonated message, every text message, there's always a connection back to an account that she has, to a device that she has, or to her house.
Cava also discovered that part of her ruse, Liz was using an app which actually allowed her to send messages and receive them at a later time.
She was able to send messages pretending to be Cari, and they would arrive while she was sitting on the couch next to Dave. From Dave's point of view, Liz couldn't have sent it because she was sitting next to him the whole time. It gave a perfect alibi to Liz.
This must have taken Liz 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week. This seemed to be a full-time occupation for her, trying to stalk people and send them messages.
For Doty and Avis, the mission at this point is to get more evidence to speed up the investigation.
We brought her in for an interview about 2 weeks after she was shot.
Doty tells her he's working on a missing person case. They're trying to find Cari Farver.
The case is regarding Cari Farver. Are you familiar with her?
Barely even know her.
Yeah.
Ran into her one time.
Okay.
Just bypassing her, going into Dave's apartment to pick up my stuff.
We developed a bit of a ruse that we were going to employ on Liz. We were going to tell her that we had found remains that we believed were Cari. We've had a pretty significant break in the case. Okay. There have been some remains that have been located.
Okay.
The initial indication is that these remains are Cari. Okay. Is there anyone that you think would want to hurt Cari?
I didn't know her long enough to know if anybody wanted to hurt her.
Liz then again shifts the blame away from Cari Farver towards Amy Flora.
She was with him for 12 years. and she still goes in and out of his life all the time. So.
Yeah. So you think she could have been the person that did some of that stuff to you?
I'm just saying, as another person who would be possessive of Dave, it would be her.
Yeah, when I'm sitting across from Liz, I knew most likely she was a murderer. Even though she didn't look intimidating, that was always in the back of my mind. I knew that she was responsible for whatever happened to Cari. And I knew in order for us to solve this, she was gonna have to believe that I genuinely thought Amy was responsible for all of it. In my head, I'm thinking if she was bold enough to go and shoot you, okay, she could easily be bold enough to have done something to Cari.
And that's where Detective Doty tells her that he needs her help to get Amy to confess to Cari's murder.
We told Liz, if you get any type of messages from Amy to have anything to do with what happened to Cari, to let us know. That's like gold to me if we had something like that, because then we could start building a case. We knew she'd give us that information because she wants to see Amy out of the picture. She wants to see Amy in jail.
Police are hoping Liz will incriminate herself, give up details about the murder, and possibly lead them to the body.
This is a genius move by the police. The question is it gonna work?
All right, thank you much, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Liz Golyer had no idea that the investigators were on her tail, and they wanted to keep it that way.
Liz always believed that she was smarter than the police. She thought she could outfox them. Unfortunately for her, she ran into Doty and Avis, and they set a clever trap.
Detective Doty enlists Liz to help him get Amy to confess to Cari's murder.
And of course, the police know that Amy has nothing to do with Cari's murder and that she's not involved in this in any way.
The role I tried to play was that I wanted to solve Cari's homicide, and I believed Amy was responsible. And so we told Liz, if you get any type of messages from Amy to have anything to do with what happened to Cari, to let us know.
It took just a few days for Liz to play right into their hand.
We started receiving messages that she said were from Amy, where Amy confesses to shooting Liz at Big Lake Park.
The emails said, "I shot you, Liz, to make sure Dave stayed away from you. I got rid of the gun."
But what Detective Doty really needs are the details about the final moments of Cari Farver's life, and he explains this in a phone call to Liz.
See if you could kind of push her for some more info on the Cari thing, what she did to Cari and so forth like that. That would help our case immensely if it was more specific.
So you guys want me to try and email her back?
I'm leaving that in your court, Liz. I mean, if that's something you would feel okay doing, that'd be really helpful for us.
Just a few days later, Liz forwards a new email. This one she also says is from Amy, and it's got details about Cari's murder.
When I met Crazy Cari, she would not stop talking about Dave and him being her husband. She tried to attack me, but I attacked her with a knife. I stabbed her 3 or 4 times in the chest and stomach area, and then took her out and burned her. I stuffed her body in a garbage can with crap. The details were bone-chilling because they were graphic.
At this point, Detectives Doty and Avis push Liz almost to the breaking point and use her obsession over Dave Krupa against her.
Liz Golyer's worst nightmare was Dave Krupa getting back together with Amy Flora and potentially reestablishing their relationship. So we decided that maybe we could nudge Dave Krupa into moving in with Amy.
Shortly after that happens, I get a call from Liz. She's bawling on the phone, and she's so upset that Amy isn't in prison yet.
Looks like the only person that benefited was her. So she gets to shoot somebody, and then she gets to kill another person, and then she gets to move in with Dave, and she gets to be free. And you guys aren't arresting her.
Liz presses Doty on why the Amy confession email isn't enough evidence to have her arrested.
It's very graphic on what she did to her, and she's still not arrested.
Trying to build a case is very difficult.
I would tell Liz, hey, we need more information, things that only the killer would know.
Within days, more Amy confessions appeared.
She writes, "I really did kill Cari. And I did do it in her own car.
These emails gave us Cari's vehicle as a crime scene. So what we wanted to do is go back and look at that vehicle to determine if that crime happened there.
This is the third time this car has been searched, but this time the police actually know what they're looking for.
We opened up this door, we pulled out the passenger seat, and we pulled off the fabric off that passenger seat, and that's where we found that big red stain right in the bottom of the seat. It's a positive test for human blood.
Felt like we had located the murder scene finally. Tangible evidence finally instead of digital evidence.
We took the DNA from the blood that we found on the seat, and it was a match for Cari Farver's DNA. It's a huge moment. It changed this from a missing persons investigation, and now it's a homicide investigation.
Omaha police are now pulled into the case since that's where the murder likely happened.
I'm a cold case detective in the Omaha Police Department Homicide Unit. You take a handcuffs off her.
Detective Schneider wanted to talk to Liz. Now, she had a warrant for an unpaid traffic citation, so that gave him an excuse to actually go arrest her and bring her in.
The reason why you're brought down here in handcuffs is because you have a misdemeanor warrant here in Douglas County.
Now, once she's actually in the interview chair, Detective Schneider tells her the real subject of their interview that day, Cari Farver.
Now, the reason why you're in this chair right now today is because you have a lot of questions that you need to answer for me. Her phone was at your house right after she disappeared. And I want to ask you how you can explain that to me, please.
She's never been to my house.
Your fingerprints are inside her vehicle. How would your fingerprints be inside her vehicle?
I don't know, because I've never been in her car.
You drove her car.
No, I didn't. I've never been inside her car. I've never even been around her car. Ever.
Your fingerprints are in there.
No, I haven't. I'm not lying. I've never been around her car. I've never even seen it.
She definitely was giving me the old evil eye. She was upset, you could tell by being confronted. For years and years, people have been sending emails under Cari's fictitious accounts. The IP addresses show up to whose house? Your house.
I haven't had internet at my house.
You definitely see a woman who thinks she's smarter than the police, who doesn't recognize that she's in a mousetrap.
Are you gonna sit in this chair and be remorseful? Or are you gonna sit in this chair and be cold-blooded? Because right now, after 4 years, this family's been looking for answers.
Detective Schneider then confronts Liz and tells her he knows that she wrote the so-called Amy confession emails.
Why would you create all these emails?
I haven't created any emails.
All these have been coming from your
they're not.
House.
And I'm not going to be accused of something that I didn't do.
Liz is the type of person where it could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and you could tell her, Liz, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And she would say, no, it's not, it's midnight. The finger's pointing right at you.
Then I'm done talking, and I'm going to have my attorney, because I didn't do anything.
Okay.
While this interrogation is taking place with Detective Schneider, Detectives Avis and Doty have gotten a search warrant and are conducting a search of Liz's apartment.
When we were searching her apartment, we found two things. We found Cari's digital camera and camcorder. That means at some point, Liz went into Cari's house and stole those items from her house and has kept them for years after.
On Cari's camera, investigators find video taken just 2 days before Cari was killed. She had just discovered that her Ford Explorer had been vandalized.
And it's the last known video of Cari.
So Thursday night, apparently somebody here in the whopping metropolis of Macedonia, Iowa, decided Max's Explorer was not the right color. We're gonna go see if we can fix that. Somebody thought they were quite the artist.
Investigators now believe it was Liz who vandalized the car.
There's some all over the hood.
The police finally had enough evidence to get an arrest warrant.
But the strongest evidence against Liz is actually discovered after her arrest.
I came to a photo that no one had seen before.
It was like the killer wanted to keep a keepsake of what she had done. It was just chilling.
After they arrested Liz Gollier, of course, the next step is the actual preparation of the trial. Douglas County Prosecutor Brenda Beadle took on the case.
This was by far the most difficult case I've ever tried. Most homicides are dark. This one was bizarre, to the point where it would take some convincing to make somebody believe that it actually happened. There's no way that someone would let their dog die in a fire that they started. There's no way that someone would shoot themselves in the femur.
Liz Gollier's defense attorney is James Martin Davis.
James Martin Davis is somewhat of a legend in Omaha, Nebraska, a very, very well-known defense attorney.
Davis saw huge flaws in the case against Liz Gollier.
Not only was there no body, there was no crime scene, there was no murder weapon, there was no proof that she even died. We waived the jury trial and to move it up so I could try this case, hopefully before they'd find a body.
In waiving the jury trial, Davis is requesting that the trial be presided over by a judge as the fact finder instead of a jury.
And we want to get it over with. They're scrambling now still to find the body, and they don't have a body.
A few months before the trial, Ryan Avis and Tony Cava paid a visit to Dave Krupa, just as they had many times before.
And they turned around to leave, and Cava, trying to as his afterthought, said, "Hey, is there anything, we missed? Anything at all?"
The last few times we had talked to him, he always said no, he couldn't think of anything. For some reason, Dave remembered he had a tablet that was in storage for the past couple years.
Had been in a box for I don't know how long, a year and a half probably. And I don't even know why I thought about it.
When I examined the tablet, it had a micro SD card in it. And that memory card, it looked blank. If you plugged it into your computer, it would look like there was nothing there, but there was deleted information. That SD card, it turns out it had been in Liz's phone. And it had thousands and thousands of deleted images that she thought were gone. But we were able to retrieve them. There were selfies that Liz had taken. I mean, there was everything that you would normally have on your cell phone. But then I came to a photo that no one had seen before. It was reddish, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at first, but it turned out to be a human foot. A human foot with a tattoo.
And the foot was decomposing. So this person was dead.
So you have to wonder, whose tattoo is this? What we discovered is that Cari Farver had that tattoo on her foot.
And we were able to figure out that Chinese tattoo was the symbol for mother.
Mother. It was a role she loved. And of course, she loved her own mother. How perfectly fitting that the symbol of the thing most sacred to her would be the single most powerful evidence to emerge.
This photo, it was shocking. It made me realize that Liz Gollier killed Cari Farver, and she's taking photos of her body.
It's really disturbing, almost like a keepsake or a trophy. I felt like our case was not the strongest before this, but once we had this, I felt confident.
Armed with this powerful new piece of evidence, prosecutors head to trial.
This is a bizarre and twisted case of a fatal attraction. It's about an obsessive woman that would stop at nothing to get what she wanted.
And you're gonna not hear a single eyewitness saying, yeah, we saw her kill her. We saw her stab her. Not a single eyewitness even saw my client with the victim in this case.
The prosecution truly did a masterful job laying out everything they had.
Of course, key to the prosecution, those messages sent over years and years of Liz impersonating Cari and pretending Cari was alive to her mother and her son. Those messages led Cari's son, Max, to reach out to his mom 3 years after she disappeared. He wrote, "If this is really you, please come back. I want you to be at my graduation."
It's so evil. It's so harsh for this family to see these and get hope.
She's just diabolical and just cruel. It's mind-blowing that someone was capable of doing all of these things over the time period that she did them, years.
Even Liz's own attorney is struck by his client's cruelty.
I would think to myself, without disclosing my feelings to the client, I thought, holy Christ, this is despicable. But it doesn't mean that they're first-degree cold-blooded murderers.
As for Liz, she remained unfazed, even through the most graphic, damning testimony.
She was a nice woman, never displayed any emotion.
As for the motive, the prosecution doesn't have to prove that. But in this case, it seemed pretty obvious.
Liz Golyer's motive was a man, and that man was Dave Krupa.
I tried to show, wait a minute, this guy's a nice guy, but he's not somebody that somebody would kill for. And why would she kill Cari Farver?
In her mind, she felt Dave Krupa was worth all of this, so it wasn't necessarily just about Dave, it's about the guy and about winning.
Despite the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, there was no guarantee there was going to be a guilty verdict.
Question was, would Nancy and her family get justice?
How could this person do this to my daughter? And for what reason? For what earthly reason can you do this to anybody?
And what is Liz Golyer's response to the accusations against her?
I wrote to Liz and asked if she had anything she'd like to say.
This is one of the few cases that went to trial with no body, no murder weapon, no witnesses. It's a hard case to prove, it's a hard case to make, and it's even harder to get a conviction. But the web Liz Golyer was weaving, well, she got caught in it. Instead of being the spider, she became the insect.
The judge found Liz Golyer guilty of first-degree murder.
Cari Farver did not voluntarily disappear and drop off the face of the earth. Very sadly, she was murdered.
Liz was sentenced to life in prison.
I'm glad it's over with. And she's can't hurt anybody else anymore.
I want Liz to go away and never do this to anybody again. Nancy and Cari's son were foremost, in my mind. They're unfortunately the ones that have to live with the repercussions.
Since 2017, Liz Golyer has been at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women.
ABC News reached out to Liz Golyer for an interview. She declined. But she has exchanged letters with author Leslie Rule.
Liz wants out of prison. She's claiming that the real killer is still out there. I will not stop fighting until I am set free and they find the right person.
She's a psychopathic, toxic narcissist. It's all about her. As for Dave, the years of being stalked and harassed and fooled by Liz have had a big impact.
I'm paranoid as hell. I really am. I don't trust anybody. I really don't. To me, Dodie, Avis, Chava, they're all heroes.
Those guys, they mean the world to me. I can't thank them enough. They're my boys.
You just kept thinking about Nancy and Max, and that's kind of what just kept driving us, is to get them answers.
And it was important for us to clear Cari's name because she was accused of stalking, she was accused of harassment, and she didn't do any of those things, and that's not who she was.
It's almost like murdering the victim twice, because first she actually murders her as a human being, and then she's murdering her reputation and her memory. It's so fundamentally evil. You know, there's no fate bad enough for her.
Cari was only 37 when she died. I would just want people to remember her as the fun-loving, talented, smart woman that she was. And she loved her son, and she was a tremendous mother, and she was a hard worker. If I could talk to Cari right now, I'd say I love you. I'm so glad that you were in my life. And I miss you terribly.